Thanks.
Okay, we're
We're on?
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's May 1st and the first Thursday of the month. That means it's Detroit's turn to do the solar story for Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. I'm sure if you're joining us, you're very familiar with GLREA. But just to remind you, we are a membership organization. Please join us as a member, and you'll be able to stay up to date on all the current info happening around the state, both with legislation, with Michigan Public Service Commission, as well as what our different members are doing. Detroit has the privilege of presenting a solar story every other month. So this is the month of May. We will be presenting again in July. We share with Ann Arbor. So you have Ann Arbor in June. Tonight, I'm really, really excited to share a story about the St. Suzanne, Our Lady Gate of Heaven, and St. Suzanne Côte Rouge Community Resource Center with a good friend, Steve Wasko, who also happens to be a neighbor of mine, but has worked tirelessly with this organization for several years. I will let him introduce himself and give his story on how he came into the sustainability world. But what I find especially interesting about this project is how it's a story that's not just about solar at all. And in fact, we're going to save solar for the next time we visit with this organization. We decided to give the backup story, which is the origin story on how it is that St. Suzanne has come to wanting to be part of the sustainability world. And it's a really inspiring story for everyone to hear about and to be able to share. So, Steve, are you ready to take over?
Sure. Thank you, Diane, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity. And would welcome this to be as much a discussion as a presentation, in addition to what I expect to be the Q&A at the end. So please don't hesitate to interrupt me or comment or whatever along the way. I am a neighbor of Diane's. We live on the same street, a few blocks down from each other in a historic neighborhood in Detroit, Indian Village. I'm a lifelong resident of the city of Detroit, graduate of schools in Detroit, had a career in educational administration, largely with the Detroit public school system, concluding as an associate superintendent. Also had experience as an associate superintendent for about a dozen years in the West Bloomfield School District, as well as the Office of Catholic Schools for the Archdiocese of Detroit. This is a story, as Diane said, that really is, well, it's a story, first of all, a narrative as much as anything, and hopefully it will help to kind of frame not only how we got to the solar piece that we'll talk more about tonight and in future presentations, I suppose, but just kind of how we've wrapped our minds around and framed the broader issues, not only of sustainability, but how this looks in a truly a community-based sense, in a center that's the hub of a neighborhood, literally surrounded by homes in a very typical neighborhood on Detroit's west side, in perhaps one of the more unexpected locales for this to happen. So I'm also a lifelong member and parishioner at a Catholic church in the west side of Detroit, St. Suzanne, Our Lady Gate of Heaven. And some years ago, we stopped having a Catholic school in a 48,000 square foot building adjacent to the church in a very traditional campus, church, school, rectory, convent. We at first leased the entire building to two charter schools successively, as a lot of parishes do when they have a big old building. And what are you going to do with your building? The roof's going to collapse. How are you going to pay operational costs? The windows are going to be, stolen and all kinds of stuff. So we leased to charter schools a couple times. It's solid income, but has nothing to do with your mission as a parish and a community, and kind of makes you lazy at your mission in terms of relating to your immediate neighborhood and those in your midst. So given the chance, after the conclusion of a couple of leases of charter schools about 8 years ago, we started a nonprofit organization as an extension of the parish that's called the St. Suzanne Cody Rouge Community Resource Center. And ostensibly, we're managing the building, the school building, and much of the 5-acre grounds that surrounds the church and the campus. And 5 acres, as you'll see in a future slide, which I won't go to yet, is really one full city block in city of Detroit terms, and a half of another city block adjacent, basically to the alley line, as we would call it in Detroit, where there would have been an alley, where there's now a fence line for the property line. And so I say all that to say that in starting this organization, we actually came on the heels of a little interim spot between the last charter school and our organization. Another nonprofit was operating a community center, which was largely based, not largely, it was 100% based on grant funds. Actually, one large annual grant from a large family foundation in the city of Detroit. And that's not a sustainable practice. As you all know, grants come and grants go. And so we created the new organization with a lot of weight on our shoulders that we didn't want that to happen again. We wanted a long-term existence, and we wanted not only a sustainable spot in our community, but a sustainable business plan as well. So largely, we, with the help of a whole bunch of consultants, much smarter than at least I, began a process really of subleasing and leasing space to quality organizations, and then over time increasing the number of programs that we run ourselves. Our pastor at the time referred to us as becoming not just a landlord, but a landlord and convener. And I and others kind of ran with that concept of the word convener, because you can do a lot as a convener. You can relate to what the community is asking for, and you can seek their opinion and input so that you're not driving your own will on the community and the neighborhood. Far be it from me to do that. You can also be picky and choosy. You can have high quality selections, and you can kind of operate outside of your lane. I'm really I'm not comfortable in staying in my lane. So if I were going down the road, I'd have a fender hanging out in the right lane and my hand hanging out in the left lane, maybe a flag of different colors hanging out the side, and that sort of stuff. And so we're the landlord and convener of the center, and we have programs. 67,000 people walk through our front door in the last 12 months calendar year, for everything from early childhood to senior citizens and everything in between. We kind of serve the purpose, what would be in existence in Diane and my neighborhood just a couple blocks away, and in many neighborhoods of Detroit where there's a city, municipal, or rec center. In Diane's case and mine, that's the Butzel Recreation Center, and they offer a full range of programs, as do many neighborhoods. The nearest one in the District 7 area of Detroit is quite a ways from our location, and frankly, folks in the Cody Rouge neighborhood, where the St. Suzanne's Cody Rouge Community Resource Center operates, would have no way of getting to the Adams Butzel Community Center, which may look close to some folks on whiteboards downtown who are allocating resources and space to communities, but is over 2 freeways and about 8 railroad tracks and several non-dependable transit lines. So we're pretty much the hub of the community for the kinds of things that you'd find at those kind of municipal rec community centers as well. I guess, Diane, you can advance the slide now. So kind of central, again, I said I wanted to dwell a bit on kind of just the heartbeat and the heart and soul of behind everything that we've done. So in our particular faith tradition, Pope Francis, bless his heart, just recently passed. One of his most important writings, Laudato Si, really kind of connected our need, our calling to respond to both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And that really becomes kind of a compelling issue when you're in a lower class, vulnerable community like Cody Rouge, with lower education levels, certainly lower economic levels, and a lot of other challenges as well. And what does it mean when the earth is crying and the poor are crying, and what can we do, both from our faith tradition and just our very beings, to respond to that? And that kind of gets to if anything sticks with you from this brief presentation tonight, I would hope it would just be the following point there, the bottom part of this slide. So really, we've incorporated, and this will be the case certainly with solar as well, a 5E strategy. And I like to refer to that as different entrance ramps onto this whole thing. So when I spent a dozen years working in the West Bloomfield schools and in the West Bloomfield community, if I were to call a meeting of the environmental club on Wednesday night, everybody would gather at the Baldwin Public Library. Even if we didn't bring food, there'd be a lot of interest and there'd be a lot of calling to do that. In neighborhoods like Cody Rouge in the city of Detroit, there's a lot of first order needs that are not being met very well. Safety, food, schools, lighting, crime, all of these things. So the immediate attention is not, and certainly economics and jobs. In fact, as a survey that we conducted before we started the St. Suzanne's Cody Rouge Community Resource Center really highlighted jobs as the #1 issue, far and away over all the other unmet needs in the community. So I say all that to say, and if I go back to my little narrative of how we began 7, 8 years ago, anyone who started a new nonprofit or an LLC knows that in your first year, your balance sheet, your pro forma, your income looks eerily familiar to your expenses, right? Your income might be $1 more than your total amount of expenses if you're trying to impress your board of directors that you're solvent at the end of the first year. But basically, your margins are tight and things are very tight. And with the help of some really smart planners from the IFF organization, we had a good plan going forward. And just as we were about to launch in the summer of 2018, the consultants said, well, there's going to be one more item you need to work in. The city water department has just instituted this new drainage fee, which is extremely well intentioned. In Detroit, like older communities, we have a combined sewer system that operates through a combined sewer overflow. Basically, your rain stormwater and your sanitary drainage in your buildings and properties go down the same single pipe. If you were in any of these neighborhoods while growing up, it was really cool. That little downspout next to your house went into this clay or cast iron pipe, and poof, the water disappeared. It went away. You never had to worry about it ever again. Ha ha ha, not quite the case. I don't know about your neck of the woods, but in our neck of the woods, if you get more than you were expecting, or voracious amounts or pounding amounts of either that rainwater or sanitary sewage, the system by design, by nature, CSO, combined sewer overflow, is designed to have an overflow because there's just one pipe and the pipe will explode, right? If there's too much water, nowhere to go. So the overflow by design goes into the Rouge, in a case of St. Suzanne's, the Rouge River. Also, there are points along the Detroit River and other tributaries where these combined sewer overflows go. And again, if your neighborhood's anything like mine, either ours in Indian Village or over in the St. Suzanne's Cody Rouge, we get a little bit more rain in a little bit more unpredictable and large amounts than we used to. So there's more of that overflow. So the city's water department's intention was to basically disincentivize the use of that combined downspout sewer system and basically divert the water from your roofs and hard spaces into green stormwater infrastructure practices on your property. In our case, largely that was defined by rain gardens, both retention and detention basins across the campus. The consultant said, well, you're going to have to add $24,000 to your first year budget. Again, our budget was about $1 to the good. The city water department, to its credit, made available to houses of worship and community places in the city of Detroit free water engineering services by their outside, the OHM associates in Plymouth, Michigan, water engineers, to really say how you could reduce the impact of the drainage fee by creating stormwater practices on your campus. And in our particular case, they identified 9 practices, 9 areas on the campus that we could divert water from that CSO. They called us over to their engineering facility over on Huber Street on the east side and showed us a nice little document and presentation. And on page 17 of that presentation listed the 9 practices, the square footage, the water runoff, the volume capacity, the impact of a 150-year flood, and all those things. And then the cost of installing it and the return on investment, the number of years it would take you to return. And of those 9, the average return on investment for us was over 25 years. And 2 of the practices had a return on investment of over 42 years. So I'm not sure how General Motors or Amazon or any of the big players would do their business planning, but I was running a little nonprofit and we were just trying to get through August. So a 42-year return on investment didn't make any sense. Somehow we just found ourselves in the presence of some partners that would have been not natural partners. We were in the business of creating a center, as I described earlier, that was going to provide frontline social services, direct services, food and clothing and shelter and education and other things like that. So thinking about the environmental practices was not necessarily front of mind, but we happened to be in the presence of the Friends of the Rouge and the Sierra Club and a few others, and came up with the concept, the theory, the hypothesis that if we could create some authentic educational programs around these stormwater practices, perhaps that'd be an innovative enough idea that some funders would support not just the educational programs, but the installation of the GSI as well. And that, my friends, has really turned out to be a hit. And what you see here are pictures of an adult certification programs. We certify stormwater specialists. We do 3 cohorts every summer in conjunction with Friends of the Rouge and the Sierra Club, and have had just a richly diverse set of outside funders from national organizations like the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the National Wildlife Federation, religious congregations and organizations, the United Way for Southeast Michigan, the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation, and a host of others. And we really wanted these to be authentic educational programs. So you all maybe have been involved with things where, you know, if you're going to do a rain garden or you're going to install solar, you know, there's going to be a requirement in the grant or the funding or the whatever that you got to do some community engagement. And that typically involves like a Saturday afternoon workshop where some slides are shown and maybe people get to touch the materials, but not really authentic education. So ours has been the semester-long after-school program for middle school kids in the Cody Rouge neighborhood for these 7 years since then, and this adult stormwater certification program. And I say all that to say that that really has created this kind of 5 E's focus, as you see on the slide. And that's what I describe as the on-ramp, and it's our on-ramp to the green and renewable energy piece of this as well, including solar. So in West Bloomfield, people might have gotten on the on-ramp just because of their environmental interests. I'm an ecologist, environmentalist. I care for the earth. I read what Pope Francis wrote, believe in it. But that's not where my neighbors were getting on. In the case of the new nonprofit, the community center that we were starting, it was an economic crisis that got us on this on-ramp, how to mitigate a $24,000 a year, which is now much higher, by the way. We'll talk about that drainage fee. But we created an on-ramp for those looking for education. So for the kiddies in the middle school program, their ramp to higher education and career pathways in STEM fields is greatly extended by participating in the program. They learn how to build rain gardens. They learn about the water cycle. They learn about plants, native plants. They do soil testing. They and their families build the garden. In the case of the adults, there's an education and an employment piece. Folks in Cody Rouge are not likely, wouldn't have been the most likely suspects to get jobs in the green stormwater infrastructure maintenance fields. And now they're getting jobs. We're actually contracting them out to other sites and nonprofits in Detroit, as well as in some cases, they're extending their own entrepreneurial landscaping businesses. And they're about to start an employee co-op as well, which we're really excited about. In other cases, it is the purely environmental focus. In other cases, it is any one of those focuses. But basically, our 5E strategy has been education plus employment plus environment plus economic, and economy equals empowerment, and helping to empower a community. And that really is the comprehensive way that we've looked at all of our work in sustainability and green infrastructure, and certainly the way that we greet the new opportunities in renewable energy. And with that, Diane, we can finally advance this slide. So just this is a little aerial view of the 5 acres. So there we have the church, the large school building, a lot of impervious surface, as you can see, which relates to the stormwater. If you look really closely, you would now see 8 rain gardens on the site that have diverted 30 downspouts off of 3 large buildings. And it's estimated that we're removing 600,000 gallons a year on average out of the city's CSO. But you also see here, really, you know, long-term, I would like to extend this to all the aspects of sustainability and green and renewables. So to be 100% clean renewable, to be a community solar site, EV community charging hub, resilience hub, fully employ green stormwater infrastructure practices, as well as food security replicable residential practices. And that last piece is important because I'm going to talk a little bit about this new appointment that we have to become a resilience hub in the city of Detroit. And resilience can be measured a lot of ways. It can be measured whether or not we can weather the next storm, or whether or not we have solar so we can be off the grid if there's a power outage, or whether or not we have a redundant generator, or any of those things. But ultimately, community resilience is how much of this impacts. If my pointer, if this were my screen, not Diane's, I'd rub my pointer around all the little houses around the. So thank you, Diane. That's very good. You can tell we're neighbors, right? We think alike. And how much of this is just spreading out into the neighborhood? And that's not measurable in really hard and fast terms all the time. It's not how many people attend your Saturday workshop. It's not how many people, run and do a rain garden or solar in their homes. But you start to feel it. In the water area, we started a whole community conversation around these things. And folks can become much more knowledgeable, not just about the prospect of them getting a job in those industries, but in terms of taking on the local government. When the mayor says, it's an infrastructure problem, that's why water backs up. So what does that mean? We can't do anything about infrastructure? Or we know now a little bit about the infrastructure, so we can debate with the mayor whether or not we're prioritizing city or other resources to do that. Or in fact, the $65 million that the water department is sitting on that it hasn't spent in some infrastructure funds, and why that can't go into solving the water problems in neighborhoods like Cody Rouge and elsewhere, and Indian Village, I might say as well. So the idea is to start a whole community conversation, and you really know, I guess you don't really know, but you have these little tidbits of a sense that it's working. So we were working on rain gardens for a few years, and if Diane would put her pointer on the third house south of West Chicago on the east side of Granville Street there, Isaac and Archie and Isaac, gentleman and his dog, would be walking around our campus, and that where we would do the afternoon stormwater program. And about the third year, he said, Steve, I'm going to build a rain garden in my own backyard. I've been watching what you guys are doing. I've chosen the plants, and we're going to go ahead and do that. The head of our neighborhood association, Bobby Johnson, just bought a hybrid. She would have been the last person on the planet I would have predicted would have bought anything other than an ICE automobile. But we had a couple chargers hanging, and I was charging my Chevy Bolt there, and all of a sudden everybody's asking about how does that work and all that sort of stuff. So you start this community conversation. Some of it starts to deflect and reflect in the neighborhood, and that's what it's all about. That's true resilience in that. So let's move forward. So a consortium led by EcoWorks Detroit, the Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and Solar Faithful applied for and received one of the larger allotments of the recent EPA Community Change Grant. Our consortium, which is, if Aubrey were here, he'd know the exact number, but let's say it's 15 or 16 sites in the city of Detroit that would become resilience hubs. And these are community centers, churches, places where people go for food and for clothing and for other essential services and the like. The grant, this Michigan, I think, is one of the larger recipients of that grant. We'll talk a little bit about its status in a minute. And the EcoWorks consortium grant was the largest in the state of Michigan. It was about 21 million. And the amount is divided not equally across the 16 sites, because some sites are bigger than our others. Ours is the largest site with the largest building and the largest campus. So we are, or were in part, destined to receive about $2.5 million for a number of these improvements. And that the idea of the resilience hub is that when we are most needed in that neighborhood that was on that previous slide, when there are the increasing and increasingly lengthy power outages in that neighborhood, as well as ours in Indian Village, or where there is the persistent flooding, as there is in Cody Rouge, and that's when we're least able to help folks when they need it the most. So what can we do to continue to stay open and be a hub when the power goes out, when the neighborhood floods, and at all times in that, and to ensure that we're diverting less than the incredibly inordinate amount of our regular resources that we are right now back to community programming and service, as opposed to paying DTE. So the general pieces of this are full solar. If you remember the picture again before, on the building on the right, there's two large flat roofs. Let's go back. Two large flat roofs, which make prime area for two large solar fields. And then go back to the next slide again. Yeah, the other way. There we go. Battery storage of that, all the other electrical hookups that are necessary, particularly in a 77-year-old building that hasn't had a lot of electrical updates. A generator to stay on, unfortunately, natural gas power generator, but hopefully we'll have to use it very few times. Electrification, so all the building, the 47,000 square foot building has 24 classrooms that are all 753 square feet and 3 large meeting spaces. Each of those areas will be heated and cooled by heat pump technology, all electrified. Improvements to the building envelope, which leaks like a sieve, sideways and up and down. Heat pump hot water sources, induction stove in our commercial kitchen for community feeding. More EV chargers, EV community rideshare vehicles. If you're not familiar with those, that's an opportunity. There's a site on the east side at the East Side Community Network over on Connor. That is the first place, you all may know others that I'm not aware of, where neighbors can sign out a vehicle, kind of like you sign out those scooters or bikes in some communities, and that's an EV. And it's hooked up to your EV chargers. In our case, one of the 2 vehicles is going to be a small minivan, which will also kind of be like the church bus or the community center bus. So again, think of the layers that we're trying to impact here. We don't have one of those currently, and our challenge to get kiddies to after-school programs or folks to church as well. So we'll be able to use it for that as well as to move around food and other items as well. And then additional stormwater management. And so hover over all of those and look at the opportunity as we're working at right now in meetings just this afternoon to include a 5Es strategy and what it can be a workforce development component for something like solar. Maybe folks in Cody Rouge won't be installing solar. Maybe they will be, but they can certainly be folks to maintain the infrastructure as well as all the other areas as well. And again, most broadly, what makes the community resilient? It's just a lifting up of the education and the awareness and the and all these things of these processes that wouldn't naturally accrue to our neighbors in Cody Rouge. Let's go to the next slide and see what that says. So that's kind of, this is some pictures of some of our activities, a clothing closet, an adult computer lab, Girl Scout troop doing Girl Scout cookies, some clearing of brush on our rain gardens, a basketball program and a gymnasium, a little free library, a senior citizens program, and a large Gleaners community, the Gleaners Food Bank community distribution that we do on a regular basis. The other piece of the 5Es, I don't know if this is a 6th E or what it is, but just the beaming off of this to others. So in the Archdiocese of Detroit, there's been a real slow, almost like antagonistic movement to a lot of this stuff. There are, I think, one church in Detroit, one Catholic church in all of the city of Detroit that has solar currently. A few that have green stormwater infrastructure, fewer yet that have some of the other items as well. We've really been lagging, and the Catholic Church is a funny thing because all of us who went to Catholic school kind of learned how to follow directions and sit in straight lines and obey the teacher and the nuns and that sort of stuff, if I might say, and we haven't really gotten clear indication from our leaders, at least locally, unlike on the earth with Pope Francis, about what direction to go with these things. The issues that have been important to church leadership in the Detroit area, at least in the Catholic Archdiocese, have been other far-flung things that we can talk about in another presentation, but they haven't been green infrastructure and sustainability. We are just a month and a week into a new Archbishop who hails from Tucson, who bought the first Chevy Equinox EV in Tucson when he was bishop there, and drives it around Detroit now on his own without a big entourage or police or anything else. He was instrumental in supporting 12 of 87 parishes in Tucson to go solar, including the main Catholic headquarters. I knew Diane would get a little rise out of that. There's about 200 campuses in the Archdiocese of Detroit across the 9 counties. Imagine if that same percentage, even as a starting point, began to look at this, or even just had the support. I don't want to pick on my Archdiocese, which I I know and love. But right now, if a church is interested in going solar, calls downtown to the buildings office, the buildings office tells them to call me. I can tell our stories. I can show a presentation like this. As you can probably tell, I can spin a good tale and I can talk about some of our experiences, but the resources should be there to support them and to encourage them. And more importantly, there should be a proactivity of encouraging them to do that, not just those who happen to call downtown or get directed to me and that. So the same is true with the other networks of it's been a rich experience in this community change grant is the third cohort of Detroit congregations that we've been involved with rather large grants. And it's really good to be in those network settings. You just see what others are doing who are in similar neighborhoods. The Lord of Lords Church on Chalmers on the east side, is Diane or any of you will correct my exact fact, but they're the second or third Black church in the state of Michigan to go solar, and I think the first in the city of Detroit. Down in 48217, 48217 is the shorthand for the most polluted zip code in Detroit, if not all of Michigan, down by the Marathon Refinery and Zug Island and all those things. The new Mount Hermon Church there has solar. And we're in the midst of these congregations and sharing our own story. We happen to excel a little bit faster in the stormwater. They excelled in solar. Pastor Glass over on Chalmers has EV chargers and a community EV vehicle and is giving Saturday workshops to his peer pastors on how they can do it as well. And those
Jesu School or Jesu School, I guess it's not a church.
Jesu, Anita, they're both advancement director and kind of their chief cheerleader for their green team. They've done a lot, and they're about to do solar on the building across the street, which will become a senior living center as well. But how do we energize other congregations or community centers to be doing this more so than they would naturally be doing it, or doing it in a reactive capacity? So why don't I stop there for right now and see what questions or comments or criticisms or whatever any of this is born on your parts. So we are, I should say, let me just, before we do that. So the consortium led by EcoWorks about 3 weeks ago received a termination letter from the EPA saying that they were un-American in pursuing this community change grant work, and the grant is terminated. They received a letter 2 days, that was a Wednesday. They received a letter on Friday from the EPA saying the termination letter was sent in error. There was a recent court ruling that rolled back all of the Trump administration stoppages of all of these things earlier this week. So the grant window, some of you will recognize how important that means, that you can draw down funds, is currently open. It's expected to be closed again later this week with another termination letter. But sufficient funding has been drawn down already to ensure that of the 16 resilience sites, the solar and the associated parts of the solar will go in. So we've had our roof core done already. We need a new roof to get the new solar on. An interesting thing in some of these older buildings, obviously. But this will happen at our site, and I think nearly all of the 15 or 16 sites this summer. So the solar will go in, and we'll keep fighting the good battle on the other items as well, as much as we can draw down and be strategic about that. But those are the little throwaway line, and joking aside, reading that letter that came that ostensibly said that, the US government, our government, we pay taxes and we vote, determined that what we were doing was not in its best interests, was a really big letter to receive. The wording was almost as impactful as the terminating of a large grant to do some of this stuff. That's the situation we're in. So the stuff that you read and hear about in the New York Times and CNN and NPR is impacting, as you all know well, all kinds of things in our communities, really food pantries, very directly, Head Start programs, all kinds of things as well. And a lot of it creates the uncertainty of one day you're terminated, the next day you're not, and how you're supposed to make sense out of all that.
And how do you order solar panels?
How do you order solar panels?
And I know everyone here is a good friend with Chart House, who is going to be the installer. They had to order panels and have them delivered. So
Yeah,
it's not like you can stop 2 trucks
yeah,
heading to Detroit when a letter arrives. So it's a lot of uncertainty. You know,
absolutely.
we all remember George H. Bush and the 1,000 points of light and how the GOP back then really appreciated the work that the nonprofits and the churches were doing. So it
You
is
know,
hard.
Congresswoman Tlaib was having a evening coffee hour at our site with about 200 neighbors a few weeks ago, and we were chatting. And you know, the climate deniers only deny that they're responsible for causing the mess in our climate. They don't deny that there's actually an impact. What they're doing in their million-dollar mansions is building them up higher, right, and building stronger stilts on the seafront and more wind-resistant siding and that sort of stuff. Because they know that the climate has changed and it's blowing roofs off of our properties and flooding and eroding the coastline. I say that to say that at its very root, you would think that of all the things they might play with, if they don't like the word environmental justice, then fine. If they just don't get that, if they don't think we should be helping poor people, then fine. If we don't think that we should be helping Black and brown people, then fine. But resilience is actually just doing what they're doing. We're hardening our defenses. We're building our little mansions higher up on stilts on the Florida coast, and we're hardening our defenses in the Cody Rouge neighborhood in Detroit to deal with what's the obvious impact of a changing climate. So the resilience, you know, you would think of all the things that they would deny, building resilience to this unknown, unexpected, we have nothing to do with climate change phenomena that's impacting all of us. Anyway, I digress.
Okay. Okay, before we get too deep into that one. Um, so the solar will be coming this summer. You're getting your roof first. And then, so the solar is the part that is going on. And I'm sure everyone who's joined us can appreciate this model that is so vital in urban areas where you have to start where people are in the first place. And for the solar and renewable energy industry, that's a really important lesson for us all, is that just because we drank the Kool-Aid doesn't mean that everyone else is drinking the Kool-Aid, and that we have to really understand we have a message, we have an important solution to a lot of problems with renewable energy. But how do we get that message to people in a way that they're ready to listen to it and to understand it? So I really appreciate this long journey that Steve and his partners have been on. One little thing that I learned, we're both in a next cycle um, cohorts with the state of Michigan on the circular economy. I'm doing which was our last talk, the solar panels that we're reusing. Could you take just a minute to talk about your food rescue program as well?
Yeah, we have several aspects of a community feeding program that's both the food distribution that I mentioned earlier through Gleaners, but also some warm meals programs, and that a component of that our partner, Chef Harriet Brown, Chef B, affectionately known, who operates a feeding program called Sisters on a Roll, that Diane met when we were up in the initial cohort meeting. Um, um, receives through the Oakland County Food Rescue, and I'm forgetting the name of the second organization, excess restaurant food from restaurants in Oakland County, and brings it to our side. She cooks it up to warm meals and currently takes about 200 of those down to the Rosa Parks Transit Center, which is our main bus terminal for city residents right in downtown, where there's a lot of folks who could need a lot of food and that. So we want to expand that. We want to scale it up. She wants to scale it up. We want to scale it up to be an everyday operation. And the concept that in next cycle is, you know, there's kind of a for-profit side and a nonprofit side. So she has a nifty little for-profit side where she's kind of mastered the art of vegan things, including the innovation of vegan chicken wings and some other things that are quite tasty and quite popular. and she can make those in quantity with the right equipment and ship them off to stores or other things, and can hire staff and the necessary stuff to further the distribution of the reused food, the leftover waste from restaurants in Oakland County. Interestingly, that program, we started the conversation. One of my reflections on that is, well, what can I do to improve some of the efficiency in our commercial kitchen, which is not very efficient at all. So what sort of funding would accrue to that? We were able to, just this afternoon at the very last moment, include in one of the pull downs of funds in the community change grant some appliances at all the sites. We'll be getting a commercial induction oven for Chef B's kitchen, which will be really nice, and some other things as well as some heat pump technology around water heaters, and that will be nice as well.
So especially important when the power goes out, that you have that opportunity to truly be a resiliency hub with food as well.
Chef
Gotta
B
get,
has lost thousands of dollars of food. I mean, we have no backup at all right now. We don't have a
oh,
small generator, not even for certain plugs in the food area. And we also house two schools, two small charter schools. We house a Head Start and early Head Start program, and we house a state licensed child care center. Suffice it to say, a lot of food goes through the building, not always as efficiently or as environmentally friendly as we'd hope, but we're working on that. But there's a lot of food, stored for the next day at any given time for the schools, through the school lunch and breakfast program and after school feeding program, as well as Chef B's community feeding. So having the power stored in the back, the first thing that the solar induced battery backup storage will be connected to will be the circuits that run the refrigerators and the freezers. I can assure you.
Yeah.
That is much needed.
Very much needed. That's so cool. I would like to open it up to questions. One thing that I'm going to follow up with you on, just so you know, is how we can get a solarized education program in your neighborhood, because it sounds like some of the residents of the area are thinking about, gee, maybe I could do that too. And it would be good if we got a head start on that to help do some solar education in the neighborhood as well. But let's see if anybody else has any questions. If you can either raise your hand or trying to get my chat thing up here at the bottom, and I don't see where it is. Any questions for Steve? You can just call him out, I guess, if you want. Bill.
Yeah, I was just wondering how big of a solar system were you planning? How many panels or kilowatts were you thinking about installing?
Forgive me, I don't remember the numbers. Would just shy of 100 kilowatts.
I think you are, yeah.
Just
97 kilowatts
Yeah, I
is
think
in
it's
my head for some
97
reason.
kilowatts. Yeah. So that's been and that fills up every square, whatever of those two flat roofs, which are ideally have no obstructions at all. That would largely based on the 15-minute reading, the highest 15-minute mark ever in the course of a 12-month period from DTE Energy, ostensibly cover nearly all of our electric needs right now. Interestingly, when we go to electrify the HVAC, because right now we're low pressure steam, old boiler, not very efficient, but run by natural gas. That's the cheaper component on a per unit basis, right, on your utility bill. We will take back about 55% of that savings. So our overall reduction in cost will be about 45%. Our overall reduction in carbon footprint will be extremely significant. Our overall improvement in creature comforts for the rooms will be extremely important. We sometimes get used to just assuming that old buildings in cities like Detroit that have schools and educational programs, it's okay for them to be too hot in the summer and too cold at other times and leaky windows. But these are children who have a higher preponderance of asthma and everything than the population as a whole. And at the end of the day, they deserve an environment that's just as nice as in the affluent suburbs and that. So we'll have those multi benefits, and our savings will go directly into community programming and that. Here's a number that I do remember. Sorry, I didn't remember the 97 kilowatts, but a number I do remember is because it's hard to forget because you're reminded by DTE every month. Our DTE combined bill tops out over $15,000 about 5 or 6 months out of the year, each month. So that's not sustainable, obviously.
Especially as rates go up.
Especially as rates go up and all the other mysterious stuff that happens with that. And so this will be a big start toward doing something about that. But even if we could afford $15,000 a month, it's putting the money in completely the wrong direction of where we should be able to be.
Right. And that's probably the best lesson for any church who typically are resistant to put the resources into solar, my own included. I had them like right at the door, ready to go. And then, well, we have these other needs first. And it's like, you're going to save $900,000 over the next 20 years. Saving it. You have to spend it first, but you save it. So it's really hard for that message to get through, is that every year that bill is going up, and you need to stop it now.
Yeah, and we benefit from, a grant that largely funds that all at the front end in this particular case.
You're
as do the other
extremely
sites.
fortunate.
So
Yeah.
that is very fortunate. But we had looked, as Diane knows well, at all of the other, both the incentive programs as well as just the financing options. And a number of those would make extremely good sense still. And we would have done this other grant the opportunity kind of came out of nowhere middle of last summer. Because I can't remember even Diane, when we first started talking to you about solar, about what
Right.
for much of the 7 years that we've been in existence, it seems like solar has been hovering above us as an obvious need in that.
Well, you're finally getting it. So
yeah, which is great.
So this is what we're most excited about.
But even for the limited number of grant opportunities there are, I can just tell you that the consortiums that are looking to work with churches and community groups around this are still oftentimes searching for good sites to include when they're going to put in an application for a dozen sites in Detroit or elsewhere. And so it's not going to cover every single site, but there's opportunities there that are still being missed. I was at a church elsewhere in west side of Detroit today that has huge physical plant problems, and they should have been upfront in getting some of this stuff even ahead of us, but just really were not well positioned to do that. They'd like to be now. I should say, not to interrupt whatever might be the next question, but I mentioned 2 other consortiums that we were in. So we received not nearly as large as the 2.5 million from the Community Change Grant, but rather sizable grants from 2 earlier programs. All of these funds derive ultimately from the IRA and other federal funding streams. But one was a program through Eagle called Sacred Spaces. So about 10 sites 10 churches in Michigan received energy improvement grants. And then a second through a different state department, LEO, the Labor and Economic Opportunity Department, for a community center grant. We combined the nearly 200,000 hour collective from those 2 to decouple what was our campus was typical of a lot of these, parochial campuses in the older, where you had a single power plant for both your school and your church. Oftentimes you even had pipes to your rectory and all over the place. So we had this, not the oldest, but not the youngest, 35-year low pressure steam boiler heating the church, and all of the controls had been shot. So even though it was inefficient, it was also just, there was no way to really, basically you had two settings, on or off. So when I would leave the campus Saturday at 6 p.m., I'd have to leave the big old boiler running at full steam to be able to make sure the sanctuary in the church was heated at 8:30 Sunday morning for church services. We were able to parlay those two grants together. So we decoupled the system, put in two new really efficient hydronic boilers in the church. They're each about the size of like a college dorm refrigerator. The old one was the size of a garage. And all the controls are working in that. Not to get too much in the weeds or geeky, but hopefully most of you will appreciate this. So the low pressure steam heats the school through 8 different zones and a whole bunch of valves and steam traps and that. It sent steam underground through a steam chase to the church, and there was a heat exchanger there that converted that to hot water and then circulated that around the perimeter of the church to heat the church building. So the clear solution was to decouple the units, to reroute the gas and everything else, and to have two new 98% efficient hydronic boilers in the church, and really efficient controls for that. I say all that to say that I've experienced that oftentimes the groups that are working on these consortium grants for these, are looking for more churches and community groups to participate rather than less. So the more
That's
that
good
we
advice. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? You can raise your hands, or again, if I have the picture up, so I'm not into my chat. John, maybe you could check the chat and see if there's any questions in the chat. We would like to have a visit with you again, Steve, once the plan is in place and we can see how well it's running. And also, like I said, follow up with some solar education. Oh, there we go. My chat just picked up on me.
I don't want to underestimate, if we have a few minutes, just some, other tips and things that may not be obvious. So the roof itself, the flat roofs were shot, and I go up there myself to patch them on a weekly basis. When we first started talking solar to some entities, and some of the federal programs and that, there was the thought that in some cases there could be, they would cover the cost of, if you put solar in this year, they would cover the cost of lifting up the solar array 5, 10 years down the road once to replace your roof, and then place the solar array back down because your roof was going to go, be past its life expectancy somewhere during the lifetime of the solar panels. We basically led a conversation that said, well, our roof's already gone. It'd be ridiculous to put anything up there without attacking. And that really became the mantra. So for most of the sites that are getting solar, which are largely older church and community buildings in a place like Detroit, the roof is being included in the work, and it'll have a reflective membrane, so it is going to make the solar much more efficient and that sort of stuff. So it's an important component. But again, the things that you may not think about when you think about, well, how do we bring solar to a community and that sort of stuff? Well, you have an old roof and an organization that wasn't in a position to replace it otherwise, that now benefits from that as well.
Good point. Because we all know how bad the roofs are. Okay, any other questions? It's really been an informative evening, especially to see the journey that the inspiration, number one, but also the journey on how long it can take. And I'm sure everyone on the call has a similar story of wanting to promote solar, but then how long it takes. But then we'll have a very happy story, we hope. Phil, you had another question?
Yeah, I was wondering, you started talking about the stormwater. Are you collecting or moving all the water that hits those roofs to um, water retention or collection spots on your property there?
We are, all of those that touch the 30 downspouts that have been disconnected so far. So that's largely nearly all of the church and about 60% of the former school community center building and a large part of our rectory or parsonage across the street. Our largest, our project, we have a separate EGO grant in conjunction with Friends of the Rouge and also funding from National Fish and Wildlife. Our largest impervious area is a large asphalt parking lot. And so we're going to attack that this summer. And that will use the existing sloping in the parking lot to collect the rainwater with rain gardens up above and some reservoirs down below. And that will make a big difference in really getting close to nearly 100% of what we can do realistically with the hard surface, the impervious surfaces on the campus.
Churches were
Should-
particularly hit hard, and large factory, any type of facility that had those large asphalt parking lots was really hard hit with the city's
Yep.
water drainage charge. And so the answer with the rain gardens was one solution, but it took quite a while for the city to plan out. I remember being in lots of meetings over this.
Yeah. And
how
that
to
wouldn't
develop
be,
that.
and that wouldn't be my primary reason. Now, that's how we started. That was our on-ramp. And looking back and looking presently in terms of what actual mitigation of our drainage charge that we're receiving, and we probably have more rain gardens than anybody. That wouldn't be the primary reason now. It's a corollary factor for sure, but now being part of this larger community education campaign is really our driving force. There's when the city started it was going to increase every year, not surprisingly. So even as you're deducting some, the base is increasing. And to Diane's point, the cap on churches, which the mayor and some legislators negotiated early on, was lifted as of about a year ago. So by far the largest part of our water bill is
Oh,
the
yeah.
drainage fee, by far.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it also expires every 3 years, so you have to renew. In our case, not to get long-winded, but we use that OHM engineering analysis to literally put on, we followed that. So we were following DWSD's own instructions as to where to put rain gardens, how much capacity to build in, how much to prepare the soil, where to put them and everything else. And even with that, when they come out and look, you won't get 100% of what you were expecting. And so anyone who would think we should just divert some downspouts and build a little rain garden, who hasn't engineered them, would be mistaken to think that they're going to get any substantial drainage credit from that. So that's a continuing challenge. Again, well-intentioned. We should totally disincentivize the concept of putting stormwater into the CSO in communities like Detroit. But how do we do that and not take, churches and other nonprofits out of business?
Yeah, and you can easily have a $40,000 drainage charge compared to your annual bill of maybe $8,000 for water and sewage. So it's
Absolutely.
kind of crazy. It's way out of whack. We have used up our time. Again, I'd really like to thank Steve for sharing this story with us. I always like to include for our Detroit Solar Stories, some of our interesting case studies of how there's been different approaches to how we're going solar in Detroit. And then this is just another excellent example of how community has risen to be the ones that are saying we want solar too. And but it's more than just wanting solar. It's helping to find solutions to some very serious issues and problems in community and lifting everyone. The rising tide is going to lift all boats. These programs are certainly going to serve as examples to the rest of us for a very, very long time. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Okay, and stay tuned with other solar stories on Thursday nights. But we'll see you all, I hope, again in July. So take care, all.